Hello and welcome to the United Mates Football Podcast. My name is Joe, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Keitel, as well as another member of the United Mates gang, Yoni. We're also very excited to be joined by a guest from the world of music who has a very special story to tell us. So special, in fact, that I can forgive the fact that he's a Chelsea fan. But before we get into that, Yoni, how have you been doing since we last spoke?
Hi guys, thanks for having me again. I've been doing relatively well, I think, at this time. I went to see some live music for the first time over the weekend in months, which was a very nice relief and something that I didn't really realize I had missed as much as I did. But apart from that, doing well, glad to be on today.
Brilliant. Oh no, that's cool. You saw some live music. Yeah, I'm also missing that. Kai, normally this is you asking me the questions at this point, and recently you asked me a question relating to Spurs' Europa League opponent. So today the tables have turned, and at the time of recording, Arsenal are a couple of days away from playing the Irish team Dundalk in the Europa League. After a bit of research online, I've discovered that the Cause are from Dundalk, which is a four-piece Irish band made up of four sisters. And of course, Kai, you are one of four brothers. So I was wondering, are we likely to see the debut of the Frankels coming anytime soon?
I think it's for the best, and for many reasons that will never happen. But the easiest and the least depressing reason is that none of us, with the exception of maybe my brother Josh, have even an ounce of musical talent in our bodies. But I guess on that note, moving on to somebody with musical talent to spare, our guest today is an old friend of mine. And as Joe mentioned, despite the team that he supports, we've managed to sort of retain this friendship. But Dmitry Sitkovetsky is a celebrated classical musician and world-class violinist, conductor, and arranger whose career in music has spanned over 4 decades and has allowed him to perform, instruct, and educate across the globe. He's currently the music director of the North Carolina-based Greensboro Symphony Orchestra, and along with fellow musicians spanning from Seattle to Moscow, he's also been performing remote concerts as part of the New European Strings Virtual Ensemble, which has found a way to bring together artists and continue to make beautiful music during COVID times. So once again, welcome to the United Mates Football Podcast, musical maestro and Chelsea fan, Dmitry Sitkovetsky. Dima, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Great to be in the company of non-professional musicians, which is nice because musicians, when they get together, they talk shop like nobody's business. But many musicians actually, traditionally big football fans, and more than just fans. You know, in Russia, I don't know, that's going back to the Pele years. You know, there was a great goalie, Lev Yashin, legendary of Dynamo Moscow, of the Soviet Union team. He was really one of the greatest goalies. So he had a personal friend, Eduard Grach, who followed him. He went to 1966, World Cup here in London, and they were great friends. And I have football fans in my family for at least 3 generations, most likely, because I come from a real dynasty of musicians. I am a 4th generation of professional musicians, starting in 1896, if you can believe it. My great-grandfather became a professional musician. He was a concertmaster of the Opera House in Baku, which is now a separate country. Azerbaijan at that time was part of Russia. And then grandfather was and grandmother was they're all musicians. They're either pianists or violinists. So now, of course, my daughter now, she's the only one who's working now. She's in Germany. Julia, of course, that's your older brother, former classmate. So she's now in Dresden, rehearsing as we speak tonight for their first performance will be almost 8 months by the time she goes on stage. Let's hope it's going to happen, because Europe is shutting down again. So we just hope that Julia will be able to sing. But she's been in Germany for almost a month now. First quarantine, and then rehearsals, and now it's just she's in Dresden, which is one of the big opera houses. Anyway, so football runs parallel my life practically as long as I can remember myself, because we used to play all the time between the lessons in the Central Music School in Moscow. And I supported actually an interesting club, which had nothing to do with anything I was good at. Torpedo. If you knew, Torpedo was an important club because I once saw the genius of Russian football, Eduard Streltsov. He had a very, very unusual life story, brilliant, sort of like Russian Pele. And then he had a horrible story where he was wrongly accused of rape of one of the ministers. So he got in jail. In his best years of playing, he was in jail. Of course, in jail, he was a hero because everybody knew Eduard Streltsov. And then he came out when he was heavier, late 20s, if maybe 30s already, and he played for that club. But you should have seen. I hope there's some. I never looked at this. I'm sure there's got to be some YouTube. He could not run, but he saw the field like nobody else. And this is something I will. And so that was enough for me to support that club. It was a very good club at that time, and that's how I even played. Believe it or not, shortly before I immigrated from Russia, I spent one summer in Crimea. At that time, it was part of the Soviet Union, and a relation of mine, he used to be married to my aunt, the captain, and he was also both captain and manager of the Simferopol Tavria. There was a club which was sort of in the upper echelon, and he took liking to me, and we played 2 by 2 on the sand, by the Black Sea. And then at some point they had a game, and he invited me, and they won the game. He even scored the goal, so we were all excited. And then I went. I must have been already in my early 20s, 20, maybe not quite 22. No, I was 21, 22. And then, of course, there was a big party, and musicians pride themselves in, having a good stamina for alcohol. So I thought, until that evening, until I got to be drinking with the football players. That was a different league, a really different league. And then the next day, of course, everybody went to the Russian sauna, and they, with those things that they beat you with the birch, birch tree, whatever, the branches. It's a famous Russian. And so they get it all out of their system. And then the next day or the following day, they play again. But boy, do they drink.
Wow.
Woo, that was serious drinking. That's when I realized that musicians can think they can drink, but next to footballers, they have no chance.
Well, you told us that musicians like to talk shop, and apparently, they like to drink too. But we're certainly no musicians, so we'll try to talk a little bit of shop, and not too much. You'll probably be thankful to hear, but we'll definitely talk our shop, which is going to be football, a little bit later. You just mentioned a bunch of great names. Yashin, who was the Black Spider, I think that was his nickname. Absolutely. This other guy going to prison reminds me of Ronaldinho, was recently in a Paraguayan prison. And you mentioned how this guy came out and he had all this perspective. You can only imagine how much time he had to sort of think about his game when he was in probably solitary confinement in prison. But moving away from that subject, and not on to drinking, although we did mention drinking, this is going to be food related. So, Dima, you mentioned Baku already. I think most people would probably assume that you're Russian, but technically that's where you were born, in Azerbaijan, Baku. So yeah. I'm not an expert on Azerbaijan, and honestly, Baku's a bit of a sensitive subject because that's where your team Chelsea thumped Arsenal in the Europa League final a couple of years ago. But I managed to sort of stir up the bravery to do some research, and I realized that in Azerbaijan there's a tradition of pairing tea and jam together. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I think to English people that sounds a bit blasphemous maybe, but it got me thinking about weird sort of pairings of food that I used to enjoy. So I'm going to out myself and tell everybody that when I was a kid, I didn't drink milk, but obviously cereal is quite a big deal when you're a kid. It's quite exciting, the colorful boxes and stuff. And my brothers always ate it. So I would make cereal, but instead of milk, I would use apple juice, which judge away, feel free to judge me. But Dima, I wanted to know, you've probably done nothing as offensive of that, but do you have a strange combination of food that you are a fan of? Have you ever put two weird things together and enjoyed it like that?
Oh, of course. Actually, I irritate my wife, who you know very well, Susan, morning, because I have my cereal with kefir, not with milk, but kefir. It's a sour milk. And that comes from probably, because I didn't really grow up in Baku. My mother was really from there, and her parents still lived there. So they would send me there to grandparents for some, lengthy stay as I was. So I absorbed obviously some of their tastes, because, the Georgian, Armenian, Azeri cuisine, the sort of beyond Caucasus, is some of the, for me, it's one of the best food ever. Really, it's all kinds of shish kebabs. But don't forget that Baku is on Caspian Sea. Caspian Sea is the place where black caviar used to be anyway. Now apparently it's running low. But I remember black caviar wooden barrels on the street, and with those huge, wooden spoons, they would just, pounds upon pounds, and it cost not much. Now it's more expensive than gold. You go to Petrosian or one of those. I mean, it's ridiculous how much, and you get a little jar at that time. So I grew up, eating caviar like nobody's business, and of course the sturgeon. That was very big. Sturgeon I love till this day, and in London you don't really find much sturgeon at all. But in New York there's a sturgeon king, actually, Barney Greengrass, on the same street where my mother used to live in Manhattan, on 86th, and he's on 86th in Amsterdam, she's on 86th in West End, and I always go there and always take, if Julie is in town, I would take her there. Susan loves it, my mother loved it. So sturgeon, caviar, and of course all kinds of shish kebab and things like that. But the day starts and ends with a special sour milk thing, which is called matsoni. So the closest thing here you could get is kefir. Susan cannot even see it. I mean, she gets sick just by looking at it. But I have my cereal every morning. I feel great. I could have kefir 3 times a day. There you go.
So kefir, sturgeon, and caviar, although from the sounds of things, never together, which is probably for the best.
Perfect. Certain things like eel, we get smoked eel. That I acquired later on in the Baltic Sea, because we used to go to the Baltic Sea, to near Riga, Latvia, and there they would just catch eels and then smoke it, and we would get it straight from the fishermen. It was just fantastic, and so now we get it from Panzers for a small fortune. But anyway, but it's still good. Yeah.
Well, I'll ask Yoni too. Yoni, are there any sort of obscure or delicacy type foods that you're into? Or like myself, have you ever done something bizarre and put two things together that don't go together?
Well, your kind of childhood actions made me remember that when I was a kid, and this is something I stress I don't do anymore, I used to dip kind of any sandwich I was having in tea. I just found it really brought all of the filling and flavors together and made the bread a bit, soggy, and it just went down well. I mean, people dip sandwiches in soup now, and this was like a version of that. I have grown out of that. The most recent thing I tried recently was sort of putting peanut butter in a bacon sandwich, which didn't not work. And I would, it just anyone else who feels like being a bit adventurous or spicing it up, I would recommend it.
All right, peanut butter in the bacon sandwich. I guess I'm not a meat eater, but maybe I'll vicariously have the opportunity to have something similar one day. Otherwise, Joe, how about you?
Yes, I suppose it's a bit weird, but at university, I didn't make many meals, but I'd often make spaghetti bolognese, and it's not that, if we ask. But what I'd do is I'd I'd get a load of mozzarella and put loads of soy sauce with the mozzarella, and kind of maybe put a few onions in there and fry it for a bit. And the people I lived with at the time always found that very weird, but I actually thought it tasted really good.
Okay.
So that's my slightly quirky thing that I'd do back a few years ago.
That's like Japanese Italian fusion.
Yeah, exactly. Fusion. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Well, now we're just going to move on to a few sort of personal questions for Dima now. So
Sure.
I'll start this bit off. So, Dima, I know we've mentioned already, but you were born in the Soviet Union, and you were born into a family of highly prestigious musicians spanning multiple generations. But at the age of 22, you decided to leave the Soviet Union. And in order to do so, you had to convince the authorities, I believe, that you had medical issues, which was clearly a very brave and ultimately life-altering decision. So what I was interested in was, can you explain why you made this choice? And also, how did you manage to pull it off?
Well, that's quite a long story, but to make it sort of more manageable within our talk, I'll tell you that, you know, growing up in the family of successful musicians, I knew right away, early on, that this glamour of being a great Soviet artist who goes abroad and gets all the, you know, applause and flowers and acclaim, and, you know, it's a special status to be able to do it. But at the same time, in practice, all the great Soviet artists were glorified slaves, because any member of the foreign Russian embassy could order them, the biggest names. Imagine a little clerk in the embassy could say, well, you're not allowed to go and meet with this one. You're not allowed, apart from the fact that all the fees and everything went to the state. So it was a way of earning foreign currency as well. And we, you know, all the artists get very little of their real fees. But that was not even the main point. The main point that I saw from inside, because I was the insider in a way. I grew up in the family, and so I knew all the ins and outs. If I were not from that, it probably would have taken me longer to understand how the system works. And I hated it, because, you know, no matter what a great artist you might be, but you still owned by the government. And, you know, the party, the KGB and everything, and, you know, being right in the center of it in Moscow, there were already files on all the 10th grade of the Central Music School had files in KGB on each one of us. Which one was, you know, was to be recruited, which one to be watched out. This one is clearly anti-Soviet, so be careful. And people would not be allowed to travel. They would be put on the blacklist, all kinds of things. I knew it all along. We read all kinds of, you know, forbidden literature like Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov and all that. We were very much in the mixture of things. It's like being in London, except more so, because Moscow was very much the center. It was like a city-state, and everything was there. The government was there, everything, the power, the money, everything. So I wanted to, there were two ways of doing it. One, of planning it. Because I was pretty good at what I was doing, and I was already laureate of several competitions, I was chosen to go to Brussels competition in '76. And I was expected to win the first prize. So the most effective for my second life, for my career in the West, would have been to go there, get the first prize, and then defect. To say, I'm no, you know, run like so many of Baryshnikov, Nuriev, and Victoria Mulova, now a friend of mine who also lives in, they left that way. But my mother, who had a very good career in Russia, and she traveled abroad as well, that would have been the end of her career. And she would never be able to come out. And I just couldn't do it, because that would have been a very selfish. And for all my other relatives, that would have been very dramatic. So the other way was longer and more painful and riskier. So I had to convince the government that the whole investment, my whole years of education and all that went to nothing, that I was no longer a valuable asset. For this, I should have, I faked my, tendonitis. I said, I have tendonitis. I did not go to that competition, which was already a big surprise because everybody wanted to go. It was very difficult to be selected. You have to win the competition there and here. So I went to a hospital for a month. I got the papers. I got the sort of academic leave on medical grounds, which was the absolute insurance policy. So they wouldn't be able to kick me out of Moscow Conservatory once I applied to immigrate. And basically I disappeared from concert life. I actually had not stepped on stage. Now it's an interesting sort of deja vu, but much different circumstances. Now I haven't seen the stage since March, but that's not quite 8 months. At that time, I did not perform for a year and a half. And at 21, 22, that's a long time. So I was risking maybe never come out if my plan would be known or if they call my for whatever. And they asked my mother if she was going with me. She said, no, it's only his decision, which was true. I was the only one in my family who wanted to go. So they decided, well, he's finished as a violinist. He's not going to play. He's not performing. He didn't go to the competition. He's got problems. So let him go. So that worked. And that, of course, I had great minds helping me. It was not just, I could just came up with this plan all 21. But anyway, then you start a whole new life. You come here, you have no violin because they wouldn't let you take your violin. So you have to play on borrowed instruments, borrowed bow and this and that. But I knew that what they couldn't stop was something that was inside of me. And that was not just my talent, but also the culture that I absorbed, and a certain quality of a survivor, because I had to finish one life. It was a particular day when I had my ticket to leave Russia forever. 77. There was no perestroika. That was just one time forever. And some people I never saw again. And thought that they would never see me because at that time Soviet Union was not looking like anything like what happened 10 years later with perestroika. So it was a dramatic moment, but I had a whole new life ahead of me. So I came to Vienna, then Rome, and then I was waiting for my visa to be allowed in the States. And then I arrived in the States, and within 1 week I was already accepted at Juilliard. And there started my really very, very different and new life, which brings me right now, 43 years later, right here, talking to you guys. There's a lot of things happened in between, but in a nutshell, that's what happened.
Sounds like somebody needs to make a movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It does read like a movie script. That's true. That's true.
No, it's an extraordinary story, and I'm sure we'll get into more details about it as the podcast goes on. But in researching your life, Dima, ahead of today, I was pointed in the direction of a TED talk that you did about 3 years ago, which I encourage anyone listening to check out. It's on YouTube. You get to see them perform as well, which is wonderful. But something that stood out to me is something that you say your wife says about you, which is that you're not made for comfort, that there's a kind of restlessness that is something that has pushed your curiosity for the world, for music, and as a result, your creativity and your creative endeavors. From the outside, at least, it seems your life now, in comparison to leaving Russia as a refugee, is relatively settled. You're married, you have a family, you've lived in London for over 30 years. So do you feel comfort now, and how do you continue to be curious and creative in what you do?
Well, you're right, and you're not completely right, because if you have that inside of you, whether you are in the suppressive regime or in comfort, of my West Hampstead house, really a very comfortable place to be going through pandemic, when people squeezed in a tiny place where, there's no room for privacy. That would be terrible, or financial trouble. But we all have that inner anxiety, and all creative people, I believe, they cannot sit still, and I always question, have I done? It's not even a question. Have I done the right things? Maybe I should have done this, because I've done many things in many different areas. Because I have a very eclectic taste in the arts in general, and I've combined different arts with music, and I've put together real shows with people. With one of my latest ventures 3 years ago, finally, after 7 years dreaming about it, I put together completely reinvented Soldier's Tale of Igor Stravinsky, where I commissioned a new text. I completely reshuffled the things, and I invited the Russian Bob Dylan, Andrei Makarevich from the Time Machine rock group, who I'd known for years, but I hadn't been in touch with him, and also Vladimir Posner, he's the most respected and the most famous journalist with the biggest talk show on television. So they were the two actors, and I was also acting the three main roles, and there are 3 musicians and 2 dancers. It's a real show, and it was a huge success. And I would have never been able. Every time I started something off the beaten path, my colleagues always thought that I was crazy. Oh, come on, that's not going to work. I mean, when I did my first transcription of the Goldberg variations, which probably, if you go now on Google, you would have more entries with the Goldberg variation. People think I'm the closest thing to Johann Sebastian Bach when they meet. Oh my God, that's the one who But at the time, when I tried to sit my 2 friends, Misha Maisky and Gerard Crosset, very distinguished musicians, but also my friends and colleagues, and they were staying at my house in Wiesbaden. We lived in Germany at that time. I said, guys, come. And we were rehearsing for something else. And I said, I'm just in the middle of this transcription. I just wanted to hear. I said, what, Goldberg? Oh, you gotta be, you nuts. I mean, come on. Then my managers, when I had finished it, they said, oh no, everybody was just against it, dead set against it. And yet it became a huge success. And it's played all over the world. And, probably when I die, the only thing they're going to know in 100 years would be that transcription. So you never know. One thing I do know, that if you believe in something and you're really just drawn to it like a magnet, you've got to do it, no matter what the others think. And even successful in other things, but here they think, oh, for God's sake, I mean, you're not serious. If you're sure that this is something that has, you cannot stop thinking about it, just do it, because that is what one could be calling. It really calls upon you. And this is what this pandemic, for instance, proved. Especially first 2-3 months, I was incredibly active as a transcriber. I did this whole new, Bukovina songs, which I always, just like with the Goldbergs, I was completely immersed and I couldn't get enough. I got somebody, assisting me in America, and he was able to make some living because he lost all his money as a composer and everything, but he's great with this Sibelius program. So he would put the original into that program, which speeded up the process. And I never thought that I would get to it. It was a long time, for a year and a half, I thought about this project, but there was just no time to do it. Now I got the time. So I just stayed with it. And now if somebody would tell me that I would be doing it in spite of the fact that my orchestra is all over the world, from Seattle to Moscow, then in Seattle, San Francisco, Miami, New York, North Carolina, but it's all over Europe, London, Paris, Zurich, you name it, Germany, and then Moscow, finally. And of course, Scandinavia, because my orchestra was born there, Finland and Sweden. So that it also seemed completely mission impossible. But I'm like a bull in the arena. If you show red, you can be. Once you say, "Oh, that's impossible," that you got my attention, really, or watch me. Yeah, sometimes you don't. It's not like you, but I will certainly try. And that's what makes life exciting, because otherwise the point of just constant recycling and this and that. And look now, making parallel with football. Look what's going on in Premier League. I mean, my goodness, Everton is in first place. Aston Villa just finally lost first match, otherwise just killed Liverpool. And Leeds is in the fourth. I mean, unbelievable. All these, and they play well. It's not like all of a sudden no. They've got, every team can beat any team. And, my team is at the moment at the very unglamorous 10th place. Arsenal is there about. Man U, fortunately, even lower. But anyway, Man City cannot get its act together. I mean, what's going on? But at the same time, if you compare it to last season, where Liverpool was just preceding, it was a procession. I mean, they were great, and they were justifyingly better than anyone, but it was not as exciting. Because this season, I mean, look at all this. I mean, any match, I mean, you could tell that anything could happen. I think that sort of much more, it adds spice to life. Because one thing, of course, I'm trying just to totally reset myself, because for so many years, for over 40 years, doing in a year and a half from now. I mean, specifically with rehearsals, where I would be traveling, or at least a year. Now I have a trip in 4 weeks. I'm not sure whether it will happen or not. You just can't plan anymore. You can't plan. My daughter is supposed to sing next week. She's been rehearsing for. Can you put a lot of money to say, yeah, she will definitely? No, nobody knows. So you have to. It's a painful process for somebody who's been doing this for so many years, but you have to reset your brains in a way. The expectations of plans, realizing you just have to be put away someplace. It's just you live one day at a time.
Yeah. And I suppose the unpredictability of the world at the moment means that things like in the Premier League, we're seeing more unpredictable things happen when planning does go out the window a bit. Kai's alluded to your sort of travels around the world, how you got to where you are now. And there's an extraordinary story as well about your own violin and how it followed you out of Russia and you were reunited with it in the USA. And I read in an interview you did with Daniel Finkelstein in the Times that at the moment, you, I believe, have a 300-year-old Stradivarius, which you described as one of the greatest sounded violins at the time, and also that it's worth £6.5 million. I don't know who imposes that value on it or where that comes from,
It's
but
more. It was six and a half 3 years ago. By now, it's $10 million. But
$10 million. Wow.
It's all relative. You can't really.
Sure,
maybe you can't make another one.
Sure.
You have to go back in time and be in Cremona. It just so happened that the peak of violin making was in that little town, not particularly distinguished town, Cremona, where three great families, the family of Amati, Guarneri, and Stradivari, and everybody came there, and they were in Stradivari's workshop, and he lived to be an old man, 93 years old. And he never let his children make their own violins. They were all named Antonio Stradivari, even though they all worked for him and other great makers of the future. They all worked for him, but he was a very smart man. He was the most successful violin maker in his lifetime, and not posthumously. So,
Yeah.
but that was the peak. It's sort of like the Renaissance, in Florence, with all those phenomenal geniuses like everywhere, Leonardo and Michelangelo and Brunelleschi and all these. I mean, it's just so happened that they all met at that extraordinary, and of course they had great Medici and others in them. It was just a combination, and then the Pope, or in Rome, they were trying to get them to work for them. It was a right time. It never happened again like this. So
Yeah.
with violins, yes, and that story, yeah, Danny is my Chelsea. I met him as a Chelsea supporter, yeah, and so. And when it was 300 years of my Strad, and there was also 40 years since I left Russia, that was the year 2017, and he thought, oh, let's do an article, in the magazine section of the Saturday edition, and we spent, I don't know, maybe 3 hours. It was a very long lunch at Singapore Gardens just down here. It's his favorite restaurant. He was taking notes or recording it, and then I brought him over here to my house and I showed him the Strat. He was all excited. Anyway, so that's how that article. And so we've been going. What he wrote there is absolutely true. He really had no idea because he's not an expert in classical music, and so somebody just said, who are you going to? I said, I'm going with Dmitry Sitkovetsky. He said, what? Yeah, and so forth. And then in the article, he wrote a good piece at that time. Anyway, so let's talk football. Let's see what a miserable round. I mean, I wrote, speaking of those guys, I wrote an SMS to them after I said, now, after all the money that Chelsea spent in the summer, we are proud of having a week with 2 0-0 draws. I mean, how is that? I mean, of course, everything's relative. We were so poor in defense before, and the goalie was just a huge liability. Now it is an improvement from that point of view. But on the other hand, we couldn't do anything up in front. One thing at the time. You can't fix everything. What about Arsenal? How do you? Because I thought it was getting so much better with Arteta for a while, and you did beat us at the cup, at the end of last season. What happened now?
That's a good question. It's not going well anymore. That's for sure. But I think we've got this section on Chelsea and football coming right up. I just want to, before we jump more heavily into football, I had one last question on the music front. And I know that we earlier I'd mentioned your work with the NES Virtual Ensemble since quarantine. And honestly, like I edit this podcast myself personally, so as the person who does that, it gave me a bit of anxiety seeing these videos of the NES, because it's so many musicians remotely performing all over the world, and then I'm assuming it's somebody's job at the end to kind of put that together, which I probably wouldn't want to do, but whoever does it, good work, because it looks great and it ends up sounding amazing. So obviously, like I was saying, there's so many components going into that, but it ends up seamless. So it's like a live performance. But I want to know, because seeing as technology has allowed for you and these other musicians to continue to collaborate during the pandemic, how much has the technology sort of saved the live performance? And then how much is lost?
It substitutes the live performance, because even when there's no Zoom, actually is not very good for even talking at the same time. It's getting better, but in any case, there isn't yet a technology which does not have a delay. So for music, that's death. So we couldn't possibly be playing at the same time. It would not work, because there's always a delay, in every broadcast in the fastest. Maybe one day they will create something that will, delay. So that was So what one does, first of all, it's great deal of preparation. Of course, I do all the, I send it out, and then I establish a very strict tempo, and also dynamic, the bowings, the fingers, all the technical things. And if necessary, I have sessions with individual players. So there's a great deal, and then they practice individually. Then my the guy who creates it, who puts it together, he's a composer and a jazz pianist, but he knows music. And he's done a lot of those videos with a big band during the band. He's also married to one of our musicians, violist. She plays there. She's the one from Turkey. And he's American. And I ask him, I send him from my Sibelius program from the computer, a computer generated audio in the right tempo, and we also decide on what pitch, because pitch could be 440, 444, 440. So we do 441. Absolutely, everybody has to tune. Then he gets that MIDI track, and he transfers it into the click track. And that is a very important thing. So everybody, some of them you see, because you see big headphones, they play, they record themselves individually, everybody in different times. First, usually I'm the one who makes the first one. And often I send my own video for them just to also get closer to the style, to the phrasing, to some agogics and so forth. So while I play, I have little headphones that they're almost unseen in my, they're really, which play that thing with clicks. So you have to stay with those clicks. And he sends it to me. And sometimes we have several communications where he said, is this the right? I said, no, please make that one. It's a little, I take a little time here. So it's just a lot of preparation. Then we all send our videos. And that's where his work begins. First, he creates audio. You have to see it. It looks fantastic. I mean, imagine there's 20 plus, or sometimes 18, 17, from 17 and up to the last one, which hasn't come out yet. He's just about to gather all the material, will be 23 players. So let's say from 9, one I did for very small, the last one was just for 9, from 9 to 23. So he has this incredible switchboard with different colors and everything. And so he puts it all together as audio, and then he sends it to me. And I listen very carefully with the scores. I mark and I send him a whole, feedbacks. Here's this, and then make this one's louder, this one's softer. Here's that. Finally, I approve the audio, and then his imagination. He's a great visual artist. He makes them go like this. He makes them disappear. He makes them and wait. And I can't wait. Now that we've just recorded the 7th of this Bukovina songs, we're going to make a cycle. We're going to make one going into the other with some things, and I'm sure he'll come up with some interesting ideas. I'm going to suggest some things, but he's the one who does it. Right. So he is the editor-in-chief, so to speak.
But it sounds like you have the sort of the authority on the quality control, because it sounds like your ear is about as finely tuned as anyone's ear could possibly be. And like I said, my head's sort of spinning from just conceptualizing the project and everything that goes into it. But it looks great. As you were saying, he does a good job with the visuals. And then obviously it sounds great too. So I guess now we can ease into a bit more football and some Chelsea chat too. So the article that Yoni referred to, written by Daniel Finkelstein in the Times about you, I think Joe as well might refer to as well, that he mentions your first violin teacher, or I suppose you were talking to him about your first violin teacher and the pressure that he put on you from an early age. And then also, obviously, we mentioned your parents being musicians too, and the legacy of your father is arguably the best Russian violinist of the 20th century. On top of the pressure from your teacher, there was obviously, a lot of expectation on you. So jumping back to football, because I know we said we were going to talk about football, how similar do you think that the pressure put on young aspiring footballers is? How similar is that pressure to the pressure of being a young aspiring musician?
Oh, I think they are similar, except that as a musician, you can have a long life if you're lucky and if you're smart. You can have a long life. You can start, I've been on stage for 54 years. I won my first competition when I was 12 years old. I was just in Prague last month, judging that competition as a president of the jury. And imagine 54 years ago, I was there already. That was my first trip. So I've been at it for a long time. And if it were not for the pandemic, I would continue. Now, who knows? Maybe it's early retirement. Maybe it's just a sabbatical. Who knows? It all depends how you're going to. Nobody knows how it's going to. But even if I never go on stage again, I hope to go there in 4 weeks. But anyway, even if I don't, I've done a lot. And I think for the young ones, for the young footballer, especially if you you show early great signs of great talent, and expectations are some of the worst things that public, but especially your family and the people or your classmates or the teammates, because I'm sure the reason Frank Lampard became so incredibly successful as a footballer, because he comes from a lot of expectations. He came from a wonderful footballer, his father, and he always looked up to him. It was great authority. And then his uncle, Harry Redknapp, my goodness, such a, he's managed just about every football club in England, and then his cousin was a terrific footballer. I think maybe more gifted, naturally more gifted than Frank, because remember in West Ham they used to call him Fat Frank. He was a little bit chunk. Who knows? So he worked. So I remember very well, I had a dinner 100 years ago, just when Chelsea bought him in 2001 with David Miller, MP. He was a huge Chelsea fan and big music lover. He was doing musical quiz on radio, I don't know, Radio 3, I think, on Radio 3. And he did a musical quiz especially for me after dinner in his house. Anyway, so I remember very well in 2001, he said, oh, God, I mean, they bought Frank Lampard. What a stupid move. Imagine how wrong he was. At that time, nobody gave him any time. And yet he worked, and he always stayed late after, and he practiced, and he became the biggest scorer from midfield, for God's sake. I mean, that's an incredible achievement. I don't know whether he'll succeed as much as a manager. It's early days. But I think that, that I'll prove it to you. He's got more expectations on him right from the start, but he can handle it. If he comes in a way similar to me, dilations, or if you, of course you're not as good as your father, or of course you're not as successful as your mom, but your mom already played with Oxford when she was 9 years old. I didn't play with Oxford till I was 15. And does it make me a failure? Well, at that time probably did feel like a failure, but yet that important. So I think they need sort of a cool encouragement, not hot encouragement, because like all these mothers of famous musicians, of child prodigies, they're the most dangerous species on earth, because they just think, oh, my son the genie, my son. My mother was not like this at all, because she was busy with her own career. She was an absent mother. In many ways that was good, but still hard act to follow. But those ones that just hover, so you need sort of like a cool encouragement. Oh, that's okay. That's you've done well, but that's it. Don't make don't make them feel that, oh, now it's going to be. We don't know when this big moment is going to come. Musicians never know what's the most important concert of their life. Only looking back. Oh, I guess that must have been something that I would look back and, oh, that was a special moment. The same thing, footballers, they don't know. Sometimes you feel that something's cooking, something's going on, and it's going to be an exceptional evening. I'm sure the same for footballers. They just know, but it's a team sport. So you need also great support, and you need to look at all these great players. Timo Werner was scoring at will Germany. Now he cannot even get a decent pass from anybody, or if they do pass him, he can't get it. And the confidence of the striker. And look at Tammy Abraham. In the meantime, he was doing so well. Now what is he? Chopped liver? I mean, really? All of a sudden, what? He no good? But he doesn't get any time to play. And the others, I think it's embarrassment of riches now. Not only at Chelsea. Look at Man U. Fabulous Ajax player, Van der Beek. What is he doing there, sitting there, looking at those who cannot play, who cannot pass, and Pogba is no good. And he's sitting there. He's hot. He could be as good as De Bruyne, given a chance.
I like that to be, yeah. I'd like a player like him at Arsenal, actually, playing sort of in behind Arsenal.
Yeah. I think he made a mistake by going to Man U. It's a wrong club for him. That's because we all love Man U anyway. Yeah. Cool. But they can play. Wonderful players. I mean, what's wrong with Rashford or the Fernandes? Or I mean, they have fun. Mata played great against us, actually. Mata is I love.
Well, I guess if there's one game that he's going to try hard for, it's going to be against Chelsea, probably.
Against Chelsea, exactly.
That's so funny.
But look at our old man Mourinho. Now he's shaping Tottenham. For the first time, they actually won ugly in their history, I think. They didn't know the meaning of it. Now they won ugly just yesterday.
Well, Joe's a Spurs fan, so he'll probably have some strong feelings, thoughts and feelings on Mourinho. But I think Joe, you have some other Chelsea related questions.
Yeah, on the Tottenham thing, we certainly won ugly last night. But amazingly under Jose, things are looking quite positive. So we'll see what he can conjure up at Spurs. But going back to Chelsea, I know you were talking about Frank Lampard a bit earlier, and you said how you're confident he will succeed as a manager at Chelsea. But obviously, in the summer, Chelsea invested a lot of money in a lot of very talented players. So, off the back of signing the likes of Werner, Havertz, the new goalie Mendy, and Chilwell, Silva, lots of people, what does Lampard need to achieve this season for it to be considered a success? Do you think?
I think he needs to. You can forget about winning the Premier League or Champions League. I think maybe a cup, maybe a FA Cup, because they always have and they have to make the top four would be a really big achievement, even bigger than because last year there were two teams sort of in the running for the top, and then Leicester was threatening and then just crumbled in the end, but there was a big pause. So there was not, I think Rodgers is a very good manager. I mean, he's made that into quite an outfit. I'm very fond of Ancelotti. So Everton, I think is looking really good, really good. Yeah. Any team, I think Mourinho's got in him something. He might just, he might just will it out because he's got the players. It's a great look at Son. He's on fire. Son is
absolutely
on fire. Because I do this. I don't know whether you guys do that fantasy league. Yeah, I do now draft as well. We should probably get together and form a friendly league because I always play against people. But I'm doing pretty well in my leagues. First, second, sometimes third. But it's a guessing game. I stupidly in my fantasy league, I just changed Bamford before the last round for Watkins. I mean, what? Because he scores 3 goals, and I'm tearing my hair. But what can you do?
Bamford was a Chelsea player, right? Once upon a time.
Yeah.
Was he really?
Yeah,
he never actually played a game. He was one of those guys who they sort of sent on loan many times and then sold him off to Middlesbrough, I think. But yeah.
Well, they listen. Their track record in that department, who came and went through Chelsea, I think they took the top of the tree. I mean, how could they? De Bruyne and Salah, I mean, and many others, and many others. And then the others, the big stars like Torres, who came in Liverpool, El Nino, what was he doing at Chelsea? Not much. And he still scores now for Atletico, believe it or not. He's
Yeah, he
what,
was
10
helpful
years
for them.
old?
I think he just retired. He went to Japan, and then I think at the end of last season, he hung up his boots.
Maybe he
But
was
you're right,
already
he went
another
back
Torres.
to Atletico, and he was
Yeah, but incredibly talented. I mean, was wonderful striker. Yeah.
he was
No, we'll see. I mean, it's an exciting. It's like a cook who has maybe, we talked about food early in the program. You know, he's got sort of such diverse ingredients. I don't know whether he could actually make a digestible meal out of it. I mean, a really good meal, because he's got from such different cultures. I mean, they made such hay about Havertz. I felt he's been a liability of the last 3 games for us. So far, it's just not working. And why is he preferring him against his favorite Mount, who's always there? You know, he always plays consistently well, sometimes better, sometimes, but Havertz just like a babe in the woods. You know, he doesn't know what hit him. It's just too fast, too rough, too uncomfortable. Maybe eventually he'll get, what Ballack? I mean, he doesn't look like Ballack at all. Ballack had cojones to begin with. You know, he had a commanding presence, no matter what. No, I mean, but let's give him time. I think he will. I don't understand his whole thing with Rudiger, who can play well, and defense and everything. Well, lots of problems, but not that the others don't have it. That's a big hope. That's a big hope. The reason I think Chelsea, I remember last season, sometimes there was a run when they started finally winning games and they went up. And then the others, when they would not play well or draw instead of winning, and then the others would lose, like Arsenal or, or Man U, they would be worse.
Yeah.
So it's a topsy-turvy time. I don't know who can actually hold the reins steadily now. It just doesn't seem to be in the mix. We'll see. But it's exciting time. I mean, there's some great players to look at, and it's an exciting football. It's about the only entertainment we have, sort of live entertainment.
Exactly. Yeah. Long may it continue.
Yeah.
And speaking of topsy-turvy times, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you were having conversations about Frank Lampard when he joined as a player in 2001. So I assume you were a Chelsea fan pre-Abramovich, before that era began.
Much.
Okay. So
I was Chelsea fan when they were just mid-table. Occasionally brilliant game, and I remember people. Yeah, I saw the first goal of Gianluca Vialli. I saw, of course, Zola when he came. I saw Hullet when he came and played. Hullet played, never looked at the ball. He played like just the best Brazilians. The ball was just somewhere, always sort of attached to his feet. Was something very beautiful to look. No, I saw all of them. That was way back. No, Ken Bates, long before. But no. It was a very different. It was a different stadium too. I used to go and sit very near the VIP box, and my biggest thrill was I was about 5 seats from Bobby Charlton, because it was Man U game, and that was my great hero. I didn't mind at that time Man U, that didn't matter, but he was one of the great hero of 1966, and we watched that and we loved the English team at that time. And I saw a lot of people there, interesting people, but yeah, it was a different Chelsea. But my daughter married a Man U supporter. Can you believe it? Yeah, I mean, this is really, and I scared him. When he came to ask for her hand. That's a pretty funny story. I had a drink with him, and I said, James, we know you, of course, and we love you, but there is a problem. And he said, What do you mean? That's a serious problem because we all Chelsea supporters, and you're our biggest enemy. What do we? Oh, he said he was really taking, and I was dead serious, dead serious. And he said, "Oh, I know Julia's already, been talking to me about it. I've taken him to Chelsea games already before. Anyway, and so she's working on me." I said, "Listen, James, I've lived in this country for almost 30 years at that time. And you can get married, you can get divorced. You can change your political affiliation. You can change your religion. You even can change your sex. You can do whatever you want, but you never change the club you support. So you're okay. I don't expect, I hate the club you support, but that's okay." But I did give him a real scare. But it is true in this country. There's one thing: if somebody starts supporting another club, forget it. That's just not a real Englishman. Not
Yeah,
a
that's
real,
a lovely
because
story. I guess at least if you didn't have to respect the Man U affiliation, at least you could respect the fact that he was a real fan of whatever team he was a fan of. So
absolutely. I mean, some of my my wife's students, I mean, they support Crystal Palace. At the time, it was just like a joke of a club. Now it's a very good club. You never know. Wimbledon, Bright. I mean, look at all these clubs. Who would have thought? So you never know. If you stick to your club one day, and at that time, no. I started going to Chelsea game probably good 30. So there was not even Abramovich didn't even know where Chelsea was at that time. Just as an area.
Well,
there was none of that.
One last sort of football related thing.
Tell me.
And this is jumping back to a tournament from the past. So Euro 2008 was hosted jointly between Austria and Switzerland. And given the rich history of classical music that emanates from that part of Europe, I can remember that at the time, I don't know if you'll remember this, Dima, but ITV and BBC's coverage, they would play a lot of Mozart around the games or the highlight shows. And in particular, I really like turning into ITV because they ran heavily with Mozart's Queen of the Night. I think it's referred to as an aria. That's like the peak of my musical knowledge.
What Julia now is rehearsing to sing in Keitel. She is the Queen of the Night. With all this color. Yeah,
I love it. So speaking of, there's some songs. That one not so much with a specific club. That was for a tournament. But there's songs that are synonymous with football clubs. For instance, You'll Never Walk Alone and Liverpool. Your team Chelsea, when the game ends, they play One Step Beyond by Madness. The Villarreal faithful, they've been known to break out into a chorus of The Yellow Submarine. Their club's named after that. Of course, that's the Beatles classic. So I wanted to ask you if there's a specific song that is sort of intertwined with football culture that means a lot to you.
Interesting question. I never, well, now, of course, I know all the Chelsea songs, but they're not necessarily classical. Though I did bring a lot of classical musicians to Chelsea games because the advantage of having 4 seats and somebody cannot come, so I could get some of my, Tony Papano came, the music director of the Royal Opera House. He came many times and became eventually Chelsea supporter because, sort of by default. And then, John Williams, a fantastic guitarist, he came several times. He's an Arsenal supporter, by the way. And we always used to take each other's for dinner. If Chelsea won, I took him. And then if Arsenal, the Invincibles, he would treat us for dinner. Anyway, so, and Khvorostovsky, the great Dmitry Khvorostovsky, I took him to the football game, and I remember he was asking me, so we're going to meet Abramovich. I said, absolutely not. He said, why? I said, why do you want to meet him? He said, but we could ask. I said, listen, are you sleeping well these days? He said, yes. So it's better if you don't meet somebody like that because there's always a crime behind big fortune, always. And with the Russian oligarchs, who knows? Anyway, it's better to stay away. I know people who know Abramovich, and I saw him in his club one time. I went to see a big Russian, actually rock star, who was performing at the Bridge. he built actually a space in Stamford Bridge, which for 500 people, and mostly they were Russians. And so I saw him for. I was never, we have, friends in common, but it's fine. I mean, if he could get me a free ticket, I of course I wouldn't say no. But no, it's not necessary. Once I was invited in the VIP box in Mallorca, believe it or not, because it was Real Mallorca preseason game with Inter Milan. What a great game. And because I was opening the music festival, it was the same press conference, and the owner of Real Mallorca was there. My manager was there. They all know each other. And he said, but Dima is a big football fan. So really, so come and sit with a VIP. That was some lineup in Inter Milan. Vieira was there. Figo was there. There was just stars upon stars. And it's funny because 2 years later, I come back to Mallorca, and I asked my manager, who's been my manager there for many, many years. I said, Gonzalo, listen, so how's it? I said, remember that owner of the Real Mallorca? I said, yes, he's in jail. And the guy who was hosting press conference, the head of the, like the mayor of the island, he's also in jail. So, it's better to stay away from
Dima,
the press.
We don't want to incriminate you or get you involved in anybody who has some dodgy sort of things going on. But when's Abramovich going to invite you to perform at the Bridge?
Well, if he did invite, and if the price was right, I would go. Well, of course, because I'm sure he's quite. I know somebody in Munich who used to know him early days, where he came from and everything. So he told me some interesting stories about it. I mean, he's not a simple guy, obviously. You don't get it. And he's a quiet sort of, he doesn't talk much, and he's kind of like a sphinx figure. He's not one of those, ebullient Russians and everything. But he survived all these times so far, and I was never that impressed by material wealth. I'm much more impressed with the inner wealth, and I always felt like a millionaire, except not a monetary millionaire, though theoretically I am. If I ever sold my violin, I would be, but it's much more dear to me as what it does, so $10 million you can spend actually quite quickly these days. So it's a different kind of, different sense of values. But let me ask you before we finish, what's going on with Ozil?
Arsenal? It's a good question. I'll give you my opinion, I guess, which is that all of the things that were working in Arteta's favor last season are now potentially his hamstrings, I guess. And I think he's sorted out our defense. You were talking about Chelsea celebrating, clean sheets. You have this new goalkeeper, Mendy, Thiago Silva's bedding in, Chilwell's bedding in. Slowly but surely it's working out at the back, although in the beginning of the season it was tough. We don't have that issue with regards to conceding goals. That kind of at this point is a non-issue. It's become the opposite, which is scoring goals. So in my opinion, he has a lot of talented attacking players on the field, and they're too busy defending and not busy creating. Yoni probably shares, I would imagine, some of those thoughts, but what do you think? Yoni is another Arsenal fan.
Ozil is a name that I'm looking forward to not having to talk about soon at the end of this year. From what Arteta says, and I like the way Arteta communicates, and it has instilled a trust in him that I have. Apart from his managerial ability, it is footballing reasons. And I think there is something to be said for the fact that he, Freddie Ljungberg and Unai Emery before him, regardless of what you make of their tactical managerial abilities, have all had a problem with Ozil. There are stories that under Arsene Wenger, Ozil was indulged to a certain extent, having off days, not going to games north of Watford, all of these things. And I think Arteta is much more of someone who has a standard and expects people to meet those standards. And if they do, then great, they're in the team. And if they don't, then you can be as talented as you want. You can be the best player technically, but if you don't meet the standards, then you're not in. And personally, I think standards at Arsenal have been allowed to slip for too long. And so I welcome this change, even if it is hampering the team in the short term.
Well, yeah, there you
Well,
go.
it's a very good answer. Very, very good understanding of it. It's just a shame, he's probably already past his prime and all that, but he was a phenomenal talent. I remember when he was, still playing, and for Germany and then for Real Madrid, it's supreme. And occasionally flashes of it, but he never could really get his sort of concentration, and every week you cannot let your standards, and that's where Lampard might not have a brilliant game, but you can always rely on him. We're missing, I think, Chelsea had such fantastic spine of the team. Was Czech was absolutely always there. Terry was all, the longer we sort of away from Terry, the more it's like, impossible to emulate. He was Ashley Cole, formerly as Arsenal, then Chelsea. He was massive, but also we had great defense with Carvalho and Gallas also, and and then there was Lampard and Ballack later, but anyway, Lampard, and then there was Drogba. That spine, even 4 people, one in each position, held them together no matter. These guys, they came, they left, they came, they left. But as long as that spine was there, well, I hope the new one will be formed. Until then, it'll be, and every great team, like the Arsenal great team, had that, exactly that. That, unshakable spine of the team that just would not, waver. And I think those are the great. And you look at Barcelona now; they've lost it. Real Madrid. I mean, Hazard was phenomenal for us. Phenomenal, by far the best player. What is he doing in Madrid?
Yeah,
Not
I guess all
much.
good things come to an
Nothing.
end. Or
Huh?
I was going to say it's all cyclical. All good things come to an end, and then you go through the bad times, and you hope that sooner rather than later the good times will come back around. It's funny, we were talking about Ozil, I guess, someone who hasn't featured much for Chelsea, who could potentially be a similar player as this Moroccan fella, Ziyech, kind of plays in a similar fashion. Left-footed, kind of a creative player who it'll be interesting to see how eventually you guys manage to fit him, Havertz, Werner, Pulisic, all these guys onto the same pitch, but that will play out as it plays out, I guess, as this season progresses.
Yeah. I'm afraid you're probably right. There will be another case of Salah or De Bruyne because it's just too crowded. There's so many in the same position. I mean, how can you play every week, Mount and Pulisic and Ziyech and Havertz and then Werner. And if you play Werner, you don't play Tommy Abraham, and then where's Giroud? Giroud did great for us, actually. Great. I
love Giroud. I think
he's a wonderful player. World champion, for God's sake. I mean, really.
Second highest all-time scorer in the history of the French national team, which is
that's incredible.
Yeah,
they've had some decent strikers.
Who's the first? Platini, or who's the first?
Henry is.
Henry.
Yeah, but only by about 7 goals now or something, which is easily catchable for Giroud.
So,
and they all talking about, the Giroud never scores. He scores important goals.
Well, anyway, I'm hoping, like you said, that a few of those talents do slip through the cracks at Chelsea. If that's the end result, I won't complain. But that does bring us to the end of today's show. So thanks as always to my co-host, Joe. Thank you to Yoni as well. And then a special thanks to our guest, Dmitry Sitkovetsky. Dima, it's been a pleasure. This was a brilliant conversation. We've loved having you on the pod. How did you enjoy yourself?
Oh, thanks so much. I had a great time. I love talking football. And also, we talked about music and life in general. It's been wonderful to talk to you guys. And let's all, survive that dark times without, any effect on our psyche. That's the main thing.
It might already be too late for that.
No. You're young. You got a whole life ahead of you. Though I do have probably thicker skin because of all the things that happened. That's true. There is something to be said. Great talking to you.
Yeah,
thanks so much for having me.
We won't wait as long to catch up again next time. But before you do go, how can our guests follow you and your work. And then is there anything coming up in your life that you're looking forward to? I know you'd mentioned that Julia, your daughter, is going to be performing hopefully in Germany soon. Do you have anything coming up?
Well, now, I mean, right now I should have been in Japan for a month, and all the concerts that I was supposed to be doing, they are happening without me because they just stopped to Japan. None. So the concerts are only, so the local Japanese musicians, they benefit. They just totally cordoned off the country as they used to do when the shoguns were in power. They just cut it off. But it's one way to, and obviously COVID is not nearly as bad there or in Korea. I was supposed to be in Japan for a month and then a week in Korea, and my brand new concert hall in Greensboro hasn't been opened. It's just sitting there, 3,000, phenomenal facility for it. So it's a multi-purpose. So it's for Broadway shows and everything. And they, unfortunately, as you know, in the States, the overruling factor is a financial factor. And they figured out in so many places, like, the Metropolitan Opera canceled the whole season. New York Philharmonic canceled the whole season. It's cheaper for them to stay dark than to open for a fraction of the capacity. They calculated for 90% capacity. If it's less, they lose money, and they don't want to lose money, so they just keep it dark. And the brand new facility, it's like the flagship for the whole town of Greensboro. We've been working and fighting to get it made and to raise the money and to get the permission on it for I've been there for 16 years or maybe 17 years almost. Good 10 years at least, if not more like 12 years. Now it's finally there and we can get there.
It's a shame.
So I'm supposed to be there in January now, but the chances are not till April. I don't think so. So everything's just being pushed back. To have a heart attack thinking about it, you just have to think today is a good day. Everybody's healthy. Nobody's caught that bug. Everybody that I know. I mean, geez, conductor, I went on stage the last 2 times in St. Petersburg. Just died of it 2 weeks ago. Unbelievable. It was such a shock. There I was on stage with him when since then we've been in touch, until sort of late August, and then he caught it and he's dead. So it's not a laughing matter. I mean, it is a serious thing. You can be cavalier about it, but then you might. So in a way, it's okay as long as we're healthy and safe and in our own homes. We should be thankful at least for that. We're not in prison. This is not Second War or Third World War. Not the blockade of Leningrad where people were starving and eating each other, for no food. This is major inconvenience, but
it's true.
It's not a tragedy.
I mean, like you said,
except for those people who catch it and then die, or nearly, or get very sick. For those, it could become a tragedy. But for the rest of us who don't, no, I don't think it's a tragedy. I think it's
massive
a
inconvenience, like you said, and it's up to all of us to make sure that it passes sooner rather than later. So hopefully you can christen that new venue in Greensboro, maybe at the latest next year. It sounds like, but safe to do so. Obviously.
But you can always, you can always all the latest things, because I've been a lot more active. Of course, now I just got my YouTube channel, so there the new videos or the new recordings will be there. But also my website will have, as soon as I have something coming up. I'm so almost afraid to put this Estonian concert. Many of them I put, and then they had to be canceled or disappeared or this and that, and so it's a little bit with some trepidation, but I should put it in because they already bought me tickets. So it's just let's hope I see the stage before the end of the year.
Our fingers are crossed. That website, that's DmitrySitkovetsky.com.
Yeah.
What's your Twitter handle, just for our listeners, so that they can?
It's what is it? The Twitter. Yeah, it's a Skype there. It's G Sitkovetsky with no dot.
Okay, perfect. Well, there you have it. So
and Instagram is the same as Facebook. So
thanks again, Dima. For you listeners, please do follow us on Twitter at Instagram, where we are at United Mates FP, and then find us on Facebook under United Mates Football Podcast. Until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves and of each other,